The scorching desert sun dipped behind the golden horizon as the sleek silhouette of the Billionaire Sheikh's luxurious convoy sped silently through the twisting dunes. His reputation was a tempest whispered among the powerful, a man draped in power and mystery, commanding empires with an iron will and an icy gaze as sharp as desert glass. But tonight, fate twisted his indomitable life in a way none would expect. The opulent emirate sprawled beyond the desert's edge like a jewel, its gleaming towers casting long shadows in the twilight. The Billionaire Sheikh's palace, an architectural wonder of marble, gold filigree, and flowing fountains, stood isolated in its lavish glory. Here, realms of privilege and danger fused, where power ruled unchallenged, and secrets brewed beneath silken veils. Inside the palace, the Billionaire Sheikh's coal-black eyes flickered with frustration, the stiffness in his posture betraying the vulnerable tension he rarely let surface. His empire had been shaken tonight, an ambush narrowly escaped, a betrayal stinging like the desert's own biting wind. Yet as he prepared to summon his closest warriors for retaliation, his thoughts clung unexpectedly to one fragile soul, the 22-year-old virgin who had saved him. Across town, in a modest, faintly illuminated house scented with vanilla and blooming jasmine, Layla trembled behind drawn curtains. Her hands, calloused yet tender, gripped the edge of an ancient wooden table as whispers of the night's events swirled through her mind. The memory was vivid, how she had seen the danger from afar and acted on instinct, defying fear to pull the Billionaire Sheikh from death's icy grip. The next dawn broke with an eerie stillness. Without warning, the thunderous march of formidable warriors encircled Layla's home. Their presence sent a shudder through the neighborhood. Was it protection? Retribution? Gratitude hiding a darker shade? Layla's heart pounded in synchronized terror and wonder. She was no stranger to hardship, but this intrusion on her quiet existence was unprecedented. As the armored men stood vigilant, their faces masks of unwavering loyalty and silent warning, pointed by tears. A heart pounded in synchronized terror and wonder. Questions clamored within her. Why here? Why now? Far from the gilded palace, the Billionaire Sheikh faced a storm of conflicting emotions. Gratitude warred with suspicion, and trust was a currency more precious than gold, a currency he guarded fiercely. His eyes, when the sun ascended fully, casting molten light across the desert sands, a shadow from the past slipped into Layla's sanctuary, an enigmatic messenger bearing a cryptic warning that shattered every assumption. The arrival of a blood-stained letter, sealed by the symbol of a rival clan, unnervingly hinted that the warrior's presence was no mere protection, but the beginning of a perilous game woven with vengeance and buried secrets. Layla's breath caught as the children's laughter outside turned to wary silence. The sky held its breath too, balancing on the edge between peace and chaos. Before the next secret of this vast emirate unfolds, make sure you're part of our caravan of stories. Leave a like if the mystery of this Billionaire Sheikh has captured your heart. Tell us in the comments, what do you think is behind his warrior's sudden presence? Your passion for these stories fuels our journey. Thank you for being with us. The dawn's pale light barely touched the edges of Layla's modest home when the heavy footsteps broke the fragile quiet. The warriors, like shadows stretched tall against the pale walls, stood unwavering as the desert wind teased the jasmine that curled against the windows. Their armor gleamed faintly in the early light, a silent fortress of protection. Or was it a cage? Inside, Layla's breath caught as the weight of their presence pressed against her chest. Her eyes darted nervously, fingers trembling as they clutched the edge of the ancient wooden table beneath her. Memories tangled in her mind. The rescue, the sheer force of the Billionaire Sheikh's icy gaze, melting for the briefest moment under her touch. But what now? Was this army a shield or a harbinger of darker storms? Far away, the palace breathed with its own restless energy. Marble floors echoed with the tap of polished boots and the low murmur of advisors. The Billionaire Sheikh stood by a towering window, the desert light casting ironic shadows across his sharp features. His eyes, those obsidian depths, flickered with a rare turmoil. The ambush had rattled him. What it was the unexpected ripple caused by Layla's defiant act that unsettled his otherwise unbreakable control. He paced, clutching a gold-encrusted dagger, fingers pressing into the intricate filigree as if seeking answers etched in its cold curves. How could such vulnerability disrupt a man built on power? The girl, so fragile, yet unyielding, had unknowingly unlocked a secret he buried deep beneath layers of command and indifference. Back at Layla's sanctuary, the air was thick with unsaid questions. The children in the street had fallen silent. Even their laughter, usually bold and untamed, quieted into apprehensive whispers behind half-shuttered windows. Layla's lips pressed together, eyes scanning the unfamiliar faces of the warriors. Among them, a tall sentinel stepped forward, voice low and steady, but edged with urgency. "This is no ordinary watch," he murmured, dark eyes locked on hers. "The blood on the letter you received belongs to the clan we thought was buried in history. They seek more than revenge. They seek to unravel everything your courage has stirred." Layla swallowed hard, the weight of the words settling like a stone in her stomach. Her own heart pounded, a wild rhythm matching the anger and fear that churned within. How had her act of salvation drawn this ancient enemy to her doorstep? And what game were they playing in the shadows cast by the Billionaire Sheikh's empire? Within the palace walls, his mind raced through possibilities. The letter's seal, a crimson emblem twisted with a serpent and dagger, spoke of betrayals long past, of debts unpaid, and of threats whispered in the dead of night. The enemy was closer than ever, threading through the opulence and strength he projected. His fingers clenched into a fist, knuckles whitening. Yet, amid this storm, the Billionaire Sheikh wrestled with an unfamiliar impulse. The fragile woman who had saved his life had become a puzzle and a protector both. Could he trust her? Could he allow vulnerability to seep through the cracks of his armor? Or would that be his undoing? At Layla's, silence cracked. With the sudden crunch of gravel on the path, A figure cloaked and hooded moved with deliberate stealth, a messenger sent from a past no one wished to recall. Without a word, he pressed the blood-stained letter into Layla's hands. Her eyes widened as she traced the seal, cold dread crawling across her skin. The message within was brief, but its weight thundered in the quiet room. The bargain you unknowingly made binds not just your fate, but the fate of empires. Beware the wolf beneath the silk. Layla's gaze met the stranger's, a storm of questions burning behind her wide eyes. But he vanished as mysteriously as he had come, leaving a deafening echo of fear and uncertainty in his wake. Outside, the sun climbed higher, throwing golden light across the restless dunes. The desert, vast and indifferent, hid countless secrets beneath its shifting grains, and now Layla stood at the heart of one, torn between loyalty, fear, and the fragile hope entwined with the billionaire sheikh who depended on her bravery. In the palace, the billionaire sheikh's eyes narrowed as he recalled an ancient prophecy whispered in the halls of his ancestors, a tale of a woman with eyes like the desert night, chosen to either herald doom or salvation. His pulse quickened as he realized the threads of that prophecy might have woven themselves around Layla's fate long before the ambush. A single, sharp knock interrupted his reverie. The chamber door creaked open, and a trusted advisor stepped in, voice grave but controlled. "My sheikh, the rival clan moves swiftly. Their pawns are already within our walls. We must act." His words hung heavy, but the billionaire sheikh's gaze wasn't on the advisor. It was fixed on the horizon, where the first storm clouds gathered, ominous, relentless. He turned, voice a low command, "Prepare the palace defenses, and find the woman who holds the key to our future, before it's too late." Meanwhile, under the heavy gaze of the encircling warriors, Layla's resolve hardened. Fear no longer dominated. It was replaced by a fierce determination to survive, to protect, and perhaps to understand the man behind the cold mask. The billionaire sheikh, enigmatic and powerful, was no longer a distant figure. He was entwined with her fate in a dance as perilous as the desert winds. As dusk bled into night, a lone figure watched from the dunes, cloaked in shadows. His lips curled into a predatory smile, eyes gleaming with malice and secrets. The game had begun, and every move would bind Layla and the billionaire sheikh tighter into a web spun with vengeance, love, and danger. The desert held its breath once more, for the hour of reckoning was swiftly approaching. The morning sun cast long, trembling shadows across Layla's courtyard, as the heavy procession of armored warriors maintained its silent vigil. Their presence was a fortress, yet it felt more like a looming barrier, pressing into her fragile sanctuary with relentless weight. The scent of jasmine that once comforted her now mingled with the harsh sting of uncertainty. Layla's eyes, wide and alert, scanned the faces armored behind their helmets, unwavering, unreadable. Her fingers curled tightly around the carved wood of her table, its roughness grounding her in the moment. The blood-stained letter still burned like ice in her palm, its ominous message a knot tightening around her throat. "The bargain you unknowingly made binds not just your fate, but the fate of empires. Beware the wolf beneath the silk. Her mind wrestled with questions, each more perilous than the last. What debt had she stumbled into? What ancient vendetta now shadowed her every step? Beneath the layers of fear, a fragile tether formed, an unspoken bond with the distant figure who had once been a stranger, but now consumed her thoughts. The Billionaire Sheikh. Far beyond the modest walls of her home, the palace throbbed with potent energy. Gold chandeliers shimmered above polished marble, catching the dance of candlelight and whispered secrets. Heavy curtains stirred faintly with the movement of air, conditioned by unseen servants. The Billionaire Sheikh stood alone beside a towering window, gazing out as if trying to burn the horizon into memory. His fingers clenched around the ornate dagger at his belt, the cold metal pressing like a judgment against his palm. That ambush, the betrayal, messages from shadows of his past had clawed their way into his fortress of iron control. And now this fragile girl, Layla, had become the key to riddles he had long sought to bury beneath opulence and might. "Your courage is a double-edged blade," he whispered in the solitude of his chamber, eyes narrowing as distant thunder murmured promises of the storm to come. In the silence between thoughts, a gentle knock fractured his contemplative prison. His trusted advisor entered, expression grave but composed. "Sheikh," the man said, voice low, "the rival clan advances with cunning. Their agents thrives among our closest. The shadows we guard against walk openly within our halls." The Billionaire Sheikh turned, dark eyes alight with a storm of calculation and something more elusive, concern. "Prepare the defenses," he commanded, voice a velvet command laced with steel. "And find the woman who holds our fragile future before those wolves close their jaws." Back in Layla's humble home, the atmosphere thickened with the invisible weight of looming destiny. The children nearby pulled curtains closed and whispered prayers, while wary glances searched the sky. Layla met the tall sentinel's gaze, sensing the unspoken truths locked behind his vigilant eyes. "This is more than protection," he murmured. "The clan in that letter survived the ashes of history. They hunger to unravel the equilibrium that your bravery disturbed. Their game has only begun." Her pulse drummed a fierce cadence against uncertainty. Each breath became a shard of defiance nestled within trembling fear. She was no pawn, she resolved, but a player, tentatively stepping onto a board that spanned empires. As daylight spilled like molten gold, the desert wind carried a new arrival, a figure cloaked in shadow, their steps muffled against gravel and stone. Without a word, the stranger approached, pressing a sealed envelope into Layla's hand. Her fingers trembled as she broke the wax, revealing a map marked with letters that spoke of whispered alliances and threats old as the dunes. Her gaze lifted slowly to meet the stranger's unseen eyes, before he vanished like a wisp of smoke, leaving behind a deafening silence filled with questions. The Billionaire Sheikh paced his private chambers, mind a tangled web of fear, power, and a rare softness reserved only for Layla. The prophecy, whispered across generations, clung to his thoughts, a haunting melody with words unspoken for centuries. a woman with eyes like the desert night, a bearer of salvation or doom, written in the stars before their intertwined fates. He closed his eyes, feeling the jagged line between destiny and choice blur beneath the weight of his world. Could he surrender control to the fragile light that Layla represented? Or would yielding expose a kingdom to the venom lurking in every shadow? Meanwhile, within her walls, Layla moved with cautious purpose. The heavy gaze of the warriors remained, yet a current of something unspoken passed between them. A whisper of alliance in a language beyond words. She crossed the room, tracing the delicate thread of the prophecy in her mind, the line between victim and hero unraveling with every step. The scent of sandalwood clung to the air, weaving through the tension like a fragile promise. Her heart waged a silent war, the terror of betrayal clashing with the spark of reluctant trust toward the enigmatic Billionaire Sheikh, whose icy demeanor now seemed less impenetrable. Beneath the veneer of power, there was a vulnerability daring to break free, and perhaps an unspoken plea for salvation. Suddenly, the sharp echo of a horn shattered the fragile calm. Warriors tensed, eyes narrowing toward the horizon where dust swirled in unnatural patterns. A mounted rider raced through the dunes, bearing news that would fracture the fragile peace. The rider halted abruptly at Layla's doorstep, breath ragged, eyes wild with urgency. Sheikh's palace under siege. The rival clan claims a traitor's embrace within the walls. Layla's breath caught. Her world, already fractured, splintered anew. She looked toward the distant palace, its marble towers now shadowed beneath rolling storm clouds. As the sun dipped behind jagged dunes, casting the desert into muted twilight, the Billionaire Sheikh's gaze snapped upward, meeting the gathering tempest's reflection in the darkening skies. Then the wolf beneath the silk has finally revealed its teeth, he said, voice low yet fierce. A sudden flicker of the ornate dagger at his side caught the dying light, a silent oath, sworn in a realm where love, betrayal, and fate danced a perilous waltz. Layla's eyes narrowed, resolve solidifying like forged steel. Whatever storm was coming, she would face it, not as the fragile girl whose courage had altered empires, but as the woman entwined irrevocably with the fate of the Billionaire Sheikh, bound by secrets, shadows, and an unyielding hope. And from the distant dunes, a shadow detached itself from the gathering twilight, a smile cruel and cold, curving the edges of a face shrouded in darkness. The game had truly begun. The morning air hung heavy with uncertainty. The scent of jasmine, now a fragile thread of comfort, unraveling under the weight of lingering danger. Layla stood in her courtyard, the rising sun casting trembling shadows over cracked stone and creeping vines. Around her, the silent warriors remained like statues carved from desert iron, their eyes hidden, but their resolve unmistakable. Her fingers tightened around the edges of the blood-stained letter, the wax seal long broken, but its warning still echoing loudly in her mind. The wolf beneath the silk, a phrase twisting in her thoughts, relentless as the desert wind that swept the courtyard. What darkness had she unknowingly invited into her life? Her gaze drifted toward the horizon where the marble towers of the Billionaire Sheikh's palace pierced the slowly brightening sky. The place was a fortress of power and opulence, but this morning it held a different weight, one heavy with whispered threats and unseen enemies. Layla's breath caught, the quiet suddenly shattered by a distant horn's mournful cry. The warriors stiffened, silent, yet alive with tension, as if the very sands had shifted beneath their feet. A mounted rider appeared, dust swirling in his wake, galloping with a desperate urgency. He halted before Layla, dismounting with rapid precision. His eyes, sharp and wild, locked onto hers, words tumbling out in a breathless rush. The palace under siege. The rival clan claims a traitor walks among us. Someone within your sheikh's closest walls has broken their trust. Those words carved through the morning calm like a blade. Layla's heart slammed against her ribs, heavy and fast. The fragile peace she'd hoped to cling to shattered like glass beneath the weight of betrayal. Her mind spun. Could someone so close to the billionaire sheikh truly betray him? And what did this mean for her, a mere thread tangled in the vast web of power and vengeance? Without a moment's pause, she moved toward the palatial silhouette visible now in the distance. The desert breeze carried the scent of fear, but also an unspoken challenge stirring deep within her, a refusal to be swept away like sand in a storm. At the palace, shadows lengthened across gilded halls, soaked with history. The billionaire sheikh stood beneath the colossal chandelier, its crystals catching the dying light like shards of frozen fire. His eyes, dark and piercing, flickered with an unreadable storm, fury, frustration, and something raw that clung to the edges of his control. He clenched the ornate dagger at his side, the cold metal biting into his palm, a tactile reminder of power and pain intertwined. The whispered prophecy echoed faintly in his mind, the woman with eyes like the desert night, whose courage could birth salvation or ruin. She was the one who saved me, he murmured, voice heavy with unspent emotion. Yet now her fate is bound to the coil of betrayal tightening around this throne. His trusted advisor approached, footsteps muted against marble, eyes clouded with grave news. "My sheikh," the man intoned, "the traitor's identity remains hidden, but their reach is deep. Our enemies move like shadows, unseen until it's too late." The billionaire sheikh's jaw tightened. "Prepare the guards. Seal every passage. Let none pass without my leave." But beneath the command, a fissure of doubt crept in. Could he trust those sworn to protect him? Or had his empire begun to rot from within? Back at Layla's home, the air thrummed with a suffocating silence. The children nearby had withdrawn indoors, the usual laughter swallowed by the tension that gripped the street. She stepped inside, the walls seeming to close around her like a gilded cage. Her mind raced, replaying memories of the ambush, how she had defied the storm, reached for his hand, and pulled him from death's grasp. That moment, simple yet profound, had shifted the currents of fate beneath their feet. A soft knock fractured the stillness. Layla tensed as the sentinel she had come to trust entered, his armor clinking quietly. His eyes, sharp as falcons, searched hers. "You stand at a crossroads," he said quietly. This is no longer just about survival. The game we play now requires allies, some closer than you think. Her gaze held his, steady, though her heart fluttered. Then I refuse to be a pawn. He nodded, humility and caution mingling in his stance. Good, because the wolf beneath the silk is clever, and it wears a mask no one suspects. Night settled over the desert like a velvet shroud, the sky a tapestry of stars watching silently. Layla lit a single candle, its flame trembling but unwavering, a fragile beacon in a gathering storm. Somewhere beyond the walls, the Billionaire Sheikh paced, haunted by shadows that whispered of past sins and future reckonings. The prophecy's weight pressed heavily on his soul, intertwining with the unexpected thread of Layla's courage. Their paths, forged in fire and fear, now moved inevitably toward collision. Suddenly, a distant thunder rolled, not from the skies, but the footsteps of countless approaching shadows. The rustle of silks and steel in the night carried a chilling promise. As Layla leaned toward the flickering flame, a cold gust blew through the room, extinguishing it in an instant. In the blackness, a voice, low, taunting and filled with venom, whispered from the shadows. The wolf has tasted blood, but the hunt will only end when the desert drinks deep. Silence swallowed the room, and outside, far on the dunes, two eyes gleamed, a predator poised to strike. The air inside the palace was thick with the weight of impending danger. Shadows flickered against the walls, cast by golden lanterns swinging gently in the draft. The Billionaire Sheikh's eyes, dark and piercing as obsidian, softened momentarily as they settled on the blood-stained letter resting atop his ornate desk. A cruel reminder of the threats creeping ever closer. He paced slowly, the intricate patterns of the marble floor reflecting the calculated confidence he fought to preserve. Every step echoed in the cavernous chamber, reverberating against the silence that had wrapped the palace since the rider's urgent arrival. His thoughts churned wildly, torn between the iron will that had built empires and the flickering ember of trust ignited by a fragile woman named Layla. She was no mere passerby in his dominion. Her courage had riven the barriers he so carefully maintained. Yet, that same act, the rescue, had plunged them both deeper into a labyrinth of vengeance and ancient vendettas. Outside, the desert sun beat relentlessly, promising another scorching day. But inside Layla's modest home, the tension was a living, breathing creature. The silent warriors still guarded the thresholds, their presence an unyielding fortress that both comforted and suffocated. Layla sat quietly at her worn wooden table, the fragrance of jasmine and vanilla mingling faintly in the air, reminders of simpler times. Her fingers trembled as they brushed the cracked edges of the letter's worn parchment. The cruel words echoed. The wolf beneath the silk had revealed itself. Her heart ached with the weight of uncertainty. Betrayal so close to the Billionaire Sheikh could shatter the intricate web of alliances and loyalty he painstakingly wove. And yet, she refused to yield to despair. A sudden, sharp knock at the door sliced through the restless quiet. The tall sentinel, whose gaze had become a rare island of steadiness in the storm, entered with a cautious nod. "They move like shadows now," he murmured, voice low but urgent. "The traitor's influence weaves through the palace walls, hidden in plain sight. Trust is as fragile as glass in this game." Layla met his gaze, searching for certainty where there was only doubt. "Then we must become the storm they never saw coming." He nodded once and stepped back into the shadows, leaving Layla alone with the swirling eddies of fear and fierce determination. Far away, the billionaire Sheikh's lips pressed into a thin line. His advisors conjured grim plans, their voices a low hum beneath. The gleam of chandeliers, yet none could reach the turmoil gripping his soul. The contradiction of craving control while yearning to protect the vulnerable woman who had unwittingly entangled their fates. His hand brushed against the gold-encrusted dagger at his belt, feeling the cold weight grounding him against the tempest of betrayal. The prophecy his ancestors whispered haunted him still. A woman with eyes like the desert night, capable of salvation or destruction. Could Layla be both his undoing and his salvation? As noon's harsh light poured through soaring windows, Layla's mind raced. She recalled the moment her hands had found his, steady and commanding even in vulnerability. That moment had rewritten every rule she thought she knew about power and weakness. Her gaze drifted to the horizon, where the palace stood like a gleaming fortress, battered by hidden enemies. The wolves in silk hid behind smiles and veiled threats. She wasn't sure who to trust, but she understood this much. Betrayal was no longer a whisper. It was an imminent strike. Without hesitation, she rose, her movements deliberate. She needed answers, beyond rumors and shadows. The invitation of uncertainty was a call to arms. Meanwhile, the palace guards scoured the gilded corridors, eyes sharp beneath helmets shaped like falcon wings. Among them, a figure slipped silently, a shadow cloaked not just in fabric, but in deceit. The traitor's heartbeat echoed in the quiet, closer than anyone dared suspect. The billionaire Sheikh stood at a balcony overseeing the sprawling desert, the wind teasing the ends of his silk robes. His gaze followed a distant dust cloud racing toward the city. More than a weathered storm, it carried the pulse of upheaval. He closed his eyes briefly, the weight of looming choices pressing fiercely against his chest. Could he shield Layla without crushing the very rebellion she inspired? Could he embrace the tender hope she represented without inviting ruin? A soft stir behind him made him turn. Layla stood at the chamber's threshold, her eyes steady, despite the fluttering of shadows beneath. "Your enemies weave lies to bind us," she said quietly, voice tinged with steel and vulnerability. "But I will not be the silence in your storm. We face this together, or fall apart alone." His gaze locked with hers, a blend of admiration and guarded pain. The walls between them, built from years of solitude and power, trembled in the fragile light of shared defiance. Suddenly, the distant sound of clashing steel rang out, an alarm raised in. The heart of the palace. The traitor's hand had moved. The game was no longer whispered in halls, but roared on the battleground. The billionaire Sheikh's jaw clenched. "Prepare the palace," he commanded, his voice a rallying storm. "The shadow walks among us, and soon the true reckoning will begin. Layla's fingers curled into fists. The truth behind the wolf beneath the silk was no longer a riddle to solve. It was a threat to confront. Above them, the sky darkened as ominous clouds gathered, nature echoing the brewing tempest below. And in the deepest shadows beyond the palace walls, a cold smile split the face of the hidden enemy, eyes burning with cruel delight. The final move was looming, one that would bind the billionaire Sheikh and Layla in a dance of fire and blood, love and betrayal, from which none would emerge unchanged. The tension clung to the air like a suffocating desert haze as Layla's gaze fixed on the sealed map spread before her. The faded lines and cryptic symbols whispered of alliances buried in sand, betrayals inked in blood, and a fate entwined with the billionaire Sheikh's empire. Each mark seemed to pulse beneath her fingers, a silent scream warning of the peril that now shadowed her every step. Outside, the armored warriors maintained their vigil, statues carved from iron and loyalty. Their silence spoke volumes. No one could speak freely, while the wolf beneath the silk paced unseen among them all. Layla's heart stormed, pounding a fierce rhythm that thrust her forward. The fragile line between prisoner and protector blurred, as fear transformed into a burning resolve that refused to be quelled. Far from her cramped sanctuary, the palace breathed with a measured elegance, its marble columns catching the late afternoon sun in golden pockets of light. The billionaire Sheikh stood in the vast chamber that overlooked the ever-shifting dunes, like an empire poised on the edge of chaos. His dark eyes, usually implacable and cold, now flickered with a rare vulnerability, an ember of doubt born from the ambush, the betrayal, and Layla's unexpected intrusion into his fortress of solitude. His fingers spiraled around the gold-encrusted dagger at his belt, the cold metal biting like a reminder of everything at stake. The prophecy murmured ancient truths in his mind. The woman whose courage could either forge salvation or weave ruin. Layla. The name echoed silently in the halls of his soul, stirring currents he had long fought to resist. A soft knock shattered the thick silence. His trusted advisor stepped in, eyes dark with unease. "My Sheikh, the rival clan's pawns move swiftly. Their reach coils through our walls. Trust frays where shadows linger." The billionaire Sheikh's jaw clenched, muscles taut as an unyielding desert vine. "Bring every blade to the ready. Seal every secret passage. They will find no breach in my fortress." Yet beneath the steel of his command, a fragile tendril of worry tightened its grip. Could he protect the one who had saved him when even those sworn to loyalty might bleed him dry from within? Back at Layla's home, dusk cast long shadows over cracked stone and wilted jasmine. The scent, once comforting, now thickened with apprehension, like a heavy veil, smothering the breath of the night. She moved carefully, footsteps barely. A whisper across the worn floorboards. The blood-stained letter sat heavy in her palm, a fragile talisman of danger that threatened to unravel the world she thought she knew. The sentinel's presence narrowed the room to a bubble of unsaid truths and plummeting trust. His dark eyes met hers, unwavering beneath the weight of secrets. They fear your courage, Layla. The wolves do not stalk the empty sands. They hunt where fire burns brightest. She swallowed past the knot in her throat, voice steady, though her heart wavered like the flicker of a dying candle. Then I will be that fire. Outside, the distant rumble of hooves stirred the desert dust like a warning thunder. A rider emerged from the endless sands, urgency pulsing in every measured breath. He dismounted swiftly, eyes wild with grave news. The palace under siege. The traitor has shown their fangs, he gasped, rivulets of sweat mingling with desert grit. They claim one among the Sheikh's own has spilled loyalty for poison. Layla's breath hitched, the fragile peace shattered, fragments scattered like broken glass beneath the unforgiving sun. The empire stood on the precipice of war, and in its fragile heart, she found herself caught between shadows and light. The palace doors groaned under the mounting pressure. Inside, the billionaire Sheikh's voice was a command forged from storm and steel. Prepare the guards. Lock every gate. The serpent coils inside these walls, waiting for the moment to strike. His gaze flickered, dark and piercing, toward the horizon where thunderclouds bloomed like wounds across the burning desert sky. The ancient prophecy whispered once more. No fate was sealed without sacrifice, no salvation without peril. Suddenly, Layla felt the weight of many unseen eyes pressing down. The sting of suspicion, like 1,000 vipers, crawling beneath her skin. The fragile bond between her and the Sheikh, aided by courage and whispered trust, was stretching thin under the weight of impending betrayal. Her fingers trembled as she traced the jagged edge of the dagger she now held, a symbol of power and promise. It was not just the weapons within the palace walls that needed guarding, but the loyalties that flickered like unstable flames in the winds of desert treachery. As darkness deepened, the chamber where Sheikh and Layla stood became a crucible of whispered fears and unspoken vows. Two silhouettes cast tall and intertwined against the golden glow. The embodiment of unresolved tension, fragile hope, and the promise of fierce loyalty burning beneath layers of ice and fire. From the dunes beyond, a solitary figure moved with deadly grace, shadow merging with shadow. His smile was a slash of cruelty in the fading light as he watched the palace pulse with life and fragile defiance. A quiet voice escaped his lips, rich with menace, and savoring the game yet to unfold. The wolf reveals its claws tonight, and the desert will drink the blood of kings. The wind carried his words across the sands, a chilling promise that the reckoning was only beginning. The evening sun bled into a molten horizon, splashing the vast desert with blood-red hues that mirrored the turmoil swirling within Layla's heart. The words of the blood-stained letter clung to her thoughts like thorns. Beware the wolf beneath the silk. That ominous phrase had twisted her quiet reality into a tempest of suspicion and fear. The armored warriors remained statuesque, their silent vigilance pressing against her home like an unspoken reminder that safety and captivity often wore the same face. Layla's fingers trembled as she unfolded the fragile parchment once more, tracing the intricate seal of the rival clan. She could barely believe how the simple act of saving the billionaire Sheikh had plunged her into a world of webs, so tangled they threatened to suffocate her. Outside, the air carried the faint scent of jasmine, now mingled strangely with the metallic tang of imminent battle. Layla's gaze lifted toward the gleaming spires of the palace on the distant horizon, shimmering like a beacon and a fortress both. The palace was a grand stage of power, wealth, and secrets. But tonight, its splendor felt fragile, like glass waiting to shatter beneath the weight of betrayal. In the vast palace chamber, the billionaire Sheikh stood motionless, his silhouette carved sharp against the window where twilight waned. His obsidian eyes darkened with storm clouds of doubt and fury, yet beneath that tempest lay a flicker of something far more fragile: hope. Layla, the fragile woman who dared to reach through his world of steel and shadow, had become entwined with his fate more deeply than he could have foreseen. His fingers curled tightly around the gold-encrusted dagger at his hip, knuckles white from the unyielding grip. The blade was cold against his palm, a cruel reminder of the ruthlessness he commanded. The prophecy whispered to him still, a ghost from the past, warning of salvation or ruin, tied to a woman with eyes as dark as desert night. "My sheikh," his advisor intoned gravely, stepping into the chamber's somber light. "Their agents move like chameleons, cloaked in silk and shadow. Our trusted halls hold traitors. Our enemies wear familiar faces." The billionaire Sheikh's breath caught, a shudder rippling through the carefully constructed armor of his composure. "Seal every gate. Trust no one without my leave. Find the wolf beneath the silk before it strikes." At Layla's humble home, the heavy silence was shattered by hurried footsteps pounding against the cracked stone courtyard. The sentinel's voice broke through the tension like a lifeline. "The wolf hunts where fire burns brightest," he said low, his eyes sharp and fierce. "Your courage has lit a beacon in their darkness, Layla. They fear what you and he represent." She swallowed hard, her breath hitching with a mixture of fear and defiance. "Then let them come. I will not be their prey or their pawn." Outside, a dust cloud simmered on the horizon, heralding more than a desert storm. A rider galloped forth, his silhouette jagged against the fading sun, urgency burning in every movement. The crunch of hooves against gravel grew louder until he arrived at her threshold, dismounting with breathless haste. "The palace is under siege," he gasped, fear stark in his eyes. "The traitor shows their true face among us, within the walls." Layla's chest tightened. The fragile thread holding their precarious alliance trembled on the edge of breaking. Back inside the palace, the air shifted like a breath before a storm. The sheikh stood alone in the grandeur of his chamber, the last gleams of twilight catching on dark silk robes and glinting jewels. His mind raced to connect the cryptic threads, the prophecy, Layla's courage, the blood that had stained that letter. Could she be the salvation written in his ancestors' whispers, or a herald of doom? The distant clatter of armor and hurried voices echoed from the corridors. His razor-sharp gaze flickered, sensing the web of deception growing closer. Then the small door creaked open, and Layla stepped inside, her posture steady, but her eyes alive with the burden of their shared fate. "Our enemies wear many masks tonight," she said softly, voice laced with steel and vulnerability. "But I will stand with you. We face this darkness as one." The billionaire sheikh studied her, a fragile wildflower blooming amidst the ruins of power and treachery. His voice was barely above a whisper, thick with unusual tenderness. "Your bravery unsettles even the deepest shadows within me." Their shared silence was shattered by the sudden blare of alarms, its sharpness slicing through the palace's stately calm. The traitor had made their move. His voice hardened, a feral growl rising with command. "To arms!" The wolf's claws now draw blood. Layla's hands clenched at her sides, resolve hardening like desert stone. But wolf beneath the silk was no longer a whisper or shadow, but a living threat, clawing at the heart of their world. Beyond the palace walls, the desert wind carried the faintest trace of a cruel smile, a predator savoring the opening gambit of a deadly hunt. And in the deepest shadows, where no light dared reach, two eyes flared with merciless intent. The game had only just begun. The palace remained a fortress of silence, but beneath its golden veneer, ripples of unrest churned like the desert sandstorms that, though unseen, carved relentless paths across the dunes. The billionaire sheikh stood by the towering broad window, the waning light casting shadows that fractured his sharp features, making his obsidian eyes glisten with a storm of emotions: rage, suspicion, and an unfamiliar flicker of hope. His gaze crashed against the horizon, where distant clouds swirled menacingly, echoing the turmoil within. The bloodied letter, still fresh in his mind, spoke of secrets long buried beneath layers of royal deceit. Someone within these walls wore the mask of loyalty, but wielded the dagger of betrayal. "Find the wolf amongst the silk," he muttered, the words more a vow than a command. His hand clenched tight around the gold-encrusted dagger at his belt, its cold edge a cruel comfort against the weight pressing his chest. He was a man forged in power, yet the bond forming with Layla, the fragile woman who had defied death to pull him from the precipice, was a crack in his unyielding armor. A crack he neither welcomed nor could deny. Far from the imposing palace, Layla's modest home held its own tension, as suffocating as the desert's noonday heat. The silent warriors stood sentinel like statues etched in iron and loyalty, their unwavering vigilance both a shield and an invisible prison. The scent of jasmine, once a sweet reprieve, now blended with the metallic tang of imminent violence. Layla's fingers trembled as she traced the jagged edge of the blood-stained letter once more. Beware the wolf beneath the silk. The riddle haunted her, the cryptic threat unfurling a darkness she had neither invited nor feared willingly. Her heart thudded like relentless percussion, both terrified and defiant. Outside, the faint crackle of whispered movements stirred the air. The tall sentinel, whose boundless loyalty had become a fragile anchor in this chaotic tide, stepped forward. His voice was a low murmur, threading urgency through the stillness. The enemy thrives in shadows cast by false loyalty. No one here is above suspicion. Layla lifted her gaze, steel hardening quickly beneath vulnerability. Then we hunt in their shadows. A spark flared in the sentinel's eyes, a glimmer of respect, and he nodded once before melting back into the murmur of night. Inside the grand palace, footsteps echoed with measured precision. Warriors and advisors maneuvered in calculated deference, yet the billionaire Sheikh's mind was a tempest of splintering thoughts. The prophecy whispered by ancestors clamored. In the recesses of his soul, the woman with eyes like the desert night, destined to be either savior or doom. Could trust truly root in such fragile soil? His thoughts fractured as a servant approached, whispers urgent yet controlled. My sheikh, agents of the rival clan have embedded themselves deep within our courtiers. Their poison seeps through gilded walls. The sheikh's jaw hardened, voice as cold and unrelenting as desert stone. Seal every passage. Let no one enter or leave without my command. As the shadows lengthened, a sudden clamor sliced through the palace's heavy stillness. The distant clash of steel ringing out like a herald of approaching war. The traitor's hand was no longer concealed. Blood had stained their betrayal. The grand chessboard shifted, each move a perilous gamble with lives hanging in the balance. Meanwhile, in the quiet cage of her home, Layla wrestled with the mounting storm within and without. The bond between her and the sheikh, once tenuous and laden with unspoken tension, had hardened into a fragile alliance, tempered by shared peril. She could still feel the memory of his icy gaze melting into something almost tender. When their hands first met amid chaos, now that tenderness was shadowed by the weight of impending doom. A sudden knock shattered the thickness of the room's silence, and the sentinel reappeared, his voice a lifeline woven with steely resolve. There are eyes watching every secret, Layla. Trust must be earned anew each moment. Her gaze locked with his, defiance blazing. Then we will be their storm. At that moment, the desert wind carried with it the ominous cadence of hooves. The rider, dust swirling in his wake like dark omens, reined to a sudden stop before her doorstep. His eyes were wild, breath ragged, his words slicing through the fragile sanctuary like a sharpened blade. Palace under siege, he gasped. The traitor strikes from within. Their venom spreads deeper than we feared. Pain and resolve clashed in Layla's chest. The world she had known, the delicate balance of survival and hope, teetered on the breaking point, and at its center stood the billionaire Sheikh, her salvation, her enigma, her fate. Back in his chamber, the Sheikh turned sharply at the urgent news, eyes aflame. The wolf beneath the silk reveals its fangs, he growled, voice low and fierce. This ends tonight. A brief, tense silence fell between him and the rushing thunder outside. Two storms converging. One of nature, one of human wrath. Layla's breath was a steady flame in the tempest. Though fear folded around her like desert dusk, it was her fierce will that burned brightest. The blood-stained letter, the sealed map, the whispered warnings, all had forged her into something no longer hidden beneath fragile veils. She was a force to be reckoned with. As night fell, the palace glowed with flickering torchlight, every corridor alive with the restless pace of warriors preparing for war. The billionaire Sheikh's silhouette loomed, prince of shadows and light, bound by promises and betrayals. Suddenly, far beyond the palace walls, where dunes rolled like endless waves under moonlight, a dark figure paused, cloaked in silk, face shadowed. His cold smile was a razor's edge. He whispered into the night, voice thick with venom and victory. "The hunt begins, and the first blood will stain the sands forever." The final battle was no longer a distant threat. It was a storm crashing over the palace walls. The clamor of armed footsteps echoed through the marble corridors as the rival clan unleashed their assault, their betrayal cutting through the night like a jagged blade. Inside his chamber, the Billionaire Sheikh stood unwavering, every fiber of his being burning with fierce resolve. His dark eyes, once cold and indifferent, now blazed with a fierce protectiveness that had been born from the fragile bond forming with Layla. Layla's footsteps hurried through the winding halls, the weight of the blood-stained letter a whisper of fate in her pocket. The fear that once gripped her heart had transformed into an unyielding fire. She had been thrust into this world of power and danger, a world she barely understood. But now, standing beside the man she had once saved, she was no longer a helpless pawn. She was a partner in a battle for their future. At the throne room's entrance, warriors clashed with shadows cloaked in silk and deceit. Swords caught the flicker of torchlight, sparks flying like fireflies, desperate for survival. The scent of dust and sweat mingled with the faint aroma of jasmine, stubborn and alive, despite all that threatened to smother it. The Billionaire Sheikh entered the fray with a commanding presence, his gold-encrusted dagger flashing through the chaos. Every strike carried not only the weight of his empire, but the promise of redemption, both for himself and for the woman who had pierced through his carefully woven solitude. Amid the clashing steel, Layla found herself face to face with the face behind the betrayal, an unexpected shadow within his own court, masked by years of loyalty but poisoned at the core. The truth stung sharper than any blade. Yet she stood firm, her spirit refusing to falter. The battle reached its crescendo when the traitor, cornered and desperate, lunged toward the Billionaire Sheikh with a venomous snarl. Layla acted without hesitation, her hands grasping the arm poised to strike. Twisting with a strength born from love and survival. Their eyes met, hers steady, his shocked, and in that moment, the defiance of a single woman shifted the course of destinies. The traitor was subdued, their mask torn away, to reveal the bitter face of envy and greed. But beyond the physical victory, it was the unmasking of deceit that sealed the fate of the tangled web that had threatened to shatter the empire. Breath ragged and hearts pounding, the Billionaire Sheikh and Layla stood side by side, surrounded by the silence that follows the storm's wrath. The palace, scarred but unbroken, seemed to exhale a sigh of relief as the first light of dawn crept through towering windows. In the soft glow, the Sheikh's voice, usually sharp as desert glass, softened. "Your courage saved not only my life, but the very foundation of what we've built." His obsidian eyes searched hers, no longer hidden behind veils of suspicion, but open and vulnerable. Layla's smile was a fragile blossom, radiant against the shadows of their shared trials. I only followed the path my heart knew was right. Her voice held a new strength, a promise carried on the breeze that swept through the chamber. Together they walked to the vast balcony, overlooking the endless dunes, where the sun was finally rising over the golden expanse. The desolation transformed by light, as if nature itself acknowledged the dawn of a new era. Around them, the court gathered, faces once filled with doubt, now warmed by the twin flames of forgiveness and hope. The Billionaire Sheikh, once a tempest of power and mystery, now bore the quiet strength of a man reborn through love and trust. He raised his hand, and the silence welcomed his words as a balm. Let this day mark not only the end of darkness, but the beginning of a future built on truth and unity. His gaze swept the assembly and came to rest on Layla, whose presence had tethered him to the possibility of happiness. In that embrace of shared victory and fragile peace, they both found something previously denied, a partnership forged not by duty or vengeance, but by understanding and a love that had blossomed amid the ruins. Weeks later, the palace gardens flourished, a vivid contrast to the shadows that once haunted its halls. Layla's laughter echoed among blooming jasmine and sandalwood, her hands no longer trembling, but strong, weaving new stories into the fabric of their lives. The Billionaire Sheikh stood beside her, his gaze softer, yet brimming with the power that now carried both strength and warmth. The prophecy whispered long ago had found its answer, not in ruin, but in the unbreakable bond between a man of iron will and a woman whose courage outshone the fiercest desert sun. Their union was celebrated with joy and reverence, a testament to a journey marked by peril, but crowned by triumph. They dreamed not of empires alone, but of a home built on trust, laughter, and the quiet certainty of a future shared. As the robes of night gave way to dawn once more, the desert whispered its ancient secrets, but now it spoke of hope, a hope sealed with the promise of two hearts that had weathered storms and emerged unshaken. Under the boundless sky, the Billionaire Sheikh and Layla stood together at the horizon's edge, their shadows mingling with the endless sands, the perfect balance of fire and peace, power and grace. In that moment, everything undone was made whole, everything lost was found, and their story, once fragile as a desert bloom, was transformed forever into a legend of love's enduring light.